Okay, great. So I hope that encouraged you. I hope that gives you a little building block that sort of is here to now. Now when we spend the next 2 days talking about how do we actually go out and plant churches.
Let's plant some churches.
Let's go do it. Now,
let's risk.
You can't say no.
We're going in.
You can't say no. Someone can say no for you, but you can't. So no, I'm kidding. So what we have is, for the next 2 days, we're going to go through what's called a church planting prospectus. And a prospectus is something that you put together in order to prove your case to someone that you've got a good business idea or, social venture, or in our case, church planting. And so in the US, what they do is, for all the guys who are wanting to plant a church, they have to put together this prospectus and submit it to their regional assembly of elders for the regional assembly to judge whether or not they have a good idea about how to actually go about planting a church. But it's not just that as an outcome level. It's also there so that you can do the hard work to actually think through everything you need to think through. Not everything, almost everything you need to think through in order to plant a church. It makes you ask all the hard questions. It makes you nail down the details. And so it pushes you and stretches you. So for your assignment for the class, you're going to put together a prospectus for a church plant, either one that you're thinking that maybe God will call you to do, or you can do one in imagination of, if you were to plant a church, say in Addis Ababa or somewhere else, you can do it based on that. You would have seen in the syllabus that the assignment, we've asked you not to do a whole prospectus. It's like a 6-month process of work. You don't quite have that. You got about 6 hours. So what you're going to do is choose a couple of questions you would have seen in the syllabus. Choose 3 questions from this section, 2 questions from that section, etc. And so you're going to make a start just to get a feel of what it would be like to put a prospectus together. I've actually done one, so I had to do one for the planting of my church in Parramatta for Dave, for the SG Global, to make sure that I wasn't just going in with like, yeah, I'll plant a church, it'll be fine. I've got God, I've got the Holy Spirit, I've got the Bible. We can plant a church. Now, to some degree, yeah, you could do that. But, the Proverbs teach us that with many counselors, our plans go better. That through strategic thinking, observing even the ant, we can learn how to do things better. And so this is a process that's not in the Bible, but it's a wisdom process that can help us to think more strategically, so that when we go to plant our church, we're doing it more purposefully. We know what we're doing, we know why we're doing, we know what we're not doing and why we're not doing it, etc., etc. We know where we're going, where we're not going, who we're trying to reach, who we're not trying to reach, all those different elements. And so I hope that over this time, you start to get an idea of just, okay, it takes a lot, but it is possible. So we're going to take the next couple of hours to go through section 1, location, and Dave is going to lead us through that, and there's going to be lots of group work time. And
yeah, so the way we're going to do these sessions is there's 5 sections to our prospectus, 5 things that you'll be thinking through in order to plant a Sovereign Grace Church. And the first of those is location. A number of you mentioned it yesterday. How do you even pick where we're going to go? And there's really 9 things that we like to consider that I'll just walk through, and then we'll actually ask Riley about how we thought about it with his plan, and I'll share some of mine as well. And then what we're actually going to do is you'll all be in pairs, and you will start to put a prospectus together over the next 2 days so that we can engage with it and see how we're going. So this section, the first section is location. Question 1 then is, what is the specific location in which you are looking to plant? Number 2, in general, why do you have a desire to plant in this location? Include your own personal familiarity with the area. Number 3, describing the relevant historic development of the area and its likely trajectory sociologically, economically, ethnically, religiously, etc. Because obviously that plays out a ton. If you move to a very growing urban area, there's lots of people moving into the area, it's growing. If you move somewhere rural where everybody's leaving, it's not wrong, but you just got to be aware it's going to be small, people are going to be leaving, you've got to be able to navigate that. Number 4, what are your geographic, social, or governmental boundaries that will define the area from which you are likely to draw people? Another factor in that, of course, is if you move to an area where it's very difficult for people to work, it's hard for people to ever move to the area because they struggle to work. Number 5, what types of potential meeting places are available in this location, and how would they affect the type of church that is planted? Number 6, what other churches' ministries are currently operating in the area that could positively or negatively affect the establishment of a new church in this location? I.e., if you're looking at an area and there happens to be a very, very Pentecostal church over the road that already hate you, are you sure you want to buy the building next door? You know, you want to be thinking through, who else is here and how are we going to approach that? Number 7, what do you see are the main risks or obstacles to a successful church plant in this area? Number 8, who are people in the area whom you know that could help you understand the area from a resident's perspective and introduce you to others in the potential plant community? Number 9, for the planter's wife, what are your thoughts about the area under consideration and the opportunities and challenges that might affect raising a family there? So obviously your understanding of the area is going to be really important as best as you can, because it's going to dictate. When we move on from location, one of the things you'll see is the area you pick will dictate who actually you're reaching, your target group. So if you want to reach Somalians, for example, but then you happen to pick an area where there isn't really any Somalians, we're defeating the object before we've even began. So this is all the homework piece of, all right. So say, for example, in the United States at the moment, we're planting 2 Chinese-speaking churches in the United States. But a lot of study has gone into where are the most saturated numbers of Chinese people in the US. Let's go there, rather than just, I think I met one in a shop once, and everything's going into it. So let's do this with Riley so that we get a feel of how this kind of functions. So Riley obviously did walk through this. So what is the specific location in which you are looking to plant? Let's wind the clock back 4 years.
Yeah, so when I first came to the church, I was unsure. I had a desire to plant, but I actually didn't know where. I had a desire to plant in a semi-urban context, so I didn't want to go to the suburbs, but I didn't want to also go to the biggest city, Sydney or Melbourne straight out. So there's a few cities in my state which are sort of, small cities, more small urban cities. They still are cities, but they're just a lot smaller. So I had this idea of heading up a couple of hours up north to Newcastle or a couple of hours down south to Wollongong. And then one day, Dave just said to me, have you ever considered Parramatta? And I had never considered Parramatta up until that point. And ever from that one conversation, the Lord put that city in my heart and in my mind, and I could never lose it. I didn't want to plant in Parramatta, to be honest. It wasn't my desire. It wasn't like, I love this city. This is really, a place I want to grow or take my family. But there was something about it strategically as to where it was, as to how it was positioned within the city of Sydney, and how close it was to our sending church, that it just got lodged in my mind from about 2015. And so people would ask me, where are you planting? And I think the Lord wants us in Parramatta. And then eventually we just decided at some point, all right, we're gonna do Parramatta. That's where we're gonna try and plant a church, because God hasn't told me anywhere else. It seems like a strategic area. It's a growing area. There was 350,000 people in that spot, with another 100 to 200,000 coming in the next 10 years. All the money from the government was coming into this area. So we thought, this could be a good place. People are coming here. This could be a good opportunity.
Excellent. Okay. So that was a sort of question 2 as well, right? In general, why do you have a desire to plant in this location? Include your own personnel. But explain a bit more about, because you did start visiting the area, and what were the things you thought, I think, why couldn't it get out of your head?
Yeah, so I didn't know Parramatta at all before Dave really mentioned that. I've been there once. And so I started taking trips there. It started to try and get my mind in and around the city, and started to see how it worked. I met with various pastors in the area. I walked around the city. I looked at the plans. I looked at the demographic studies and things like that online. I started to see what it would feel like to live there. And there were things that I really liked. There were things that I thought that would be difficult. And so I started to try and familiarize myself with the area over time and meet people, et cetera, et cetera. So, yeah.
Okay, excellent. So tell us more about Parramatta. Describe the relevant historic development of the area and its likely trajectory sociologically, economically, ethnically, religiously.
So Parramatta was actually the second town in all of Australia after colonisation. So what they came into Sydney, they tried to take the harbour area and they tried to plant crops there, but they couldn't actually plant crops in Sydney Harbour. The soil didn't work. So they went up the Parramatta, what at the time wasn't called that, they went up the river, and they found a spot where, the salt water met the fresh water and the soil seemed right. And they planted wheat crops in Parramatta, and the crops took off. And that actually saved the whole colony and enabled, the British colony of whatever it was called at that time to thrive. And so they built a city around this area because it was the only place at the time where they could actually have crops. So it's a really old part of Australian history. It's an important part of Australian history. But over time, it sort of took a bit of a backseat. It wasn't considered a very important place. It sort of got a bit run down. Economically, it wasn't going forward. And then as Sydney grew and grew and grew and got a bit crowded, the government decided we need to create other cities within the city to send jobs, to send people, to send services so that Sydney City doesn't get overrun. They chose Parramatta as one of the places. So they started pouring all this funding into building buildings, parks, recreation, moving government offices there to try and make it a city hub and a centre. Built all this transportation, light rail, underground metro, all these things. And over time, Parramatta used to be, in our culture, we would say like Westie, which means you're sort of white, middle to lower class, bogan, Aussie, pretty rough and tumble. But then it started to become the first stop for migrants. And so in Parramatta, there's so many Indians, there's so many Chinese people. And so it's become a really ethnic city, a lot of Lebanese people. So there's all these different pockets within my city that make it a weird place to try and plant a church as a white guy. Because actually, as you walk through Parramatta, I'm a very small minority of the city area. And so trying to find out, that's been one of the challenges for me actually in that city is being a minority and not really having a connection with the predominant people group that are there. So that's been a challenge. So it's up and coming economically as well, which is another challenge for the city. It's getting richer, and rich people don't need God. They don't like God. They love their money. They love their wealth. And so there's not this heart cry of people who are crying out for God. It's obviously religiously diverse. Lots of Hindus, lots of Muslim, lots of Buddhist, lots of Catholics, but not a lot of Protestant Christians. So that's a bit of an overview. And so I had to do a lot of research to try and figure that out. And to be honest, I did a bit, and I probably didn't do enough going in, and I probably didn't target them well enough. And I've learned a lot more since being there for 3 years that, we're still trying to catch up, I think.
Obviously, the area we pick dictates who's going to be coming to church, because that's the people that live there, which is what this fourth question is about. What are the geographic, social, or governmental boundaries that define the area from which you're likely to draw people?
Yeah, so thinking geographically, and this would be really relevant to you guys as you think 10 in 10, so to speak, because we had to decide where will we plant that's not too far away, but not also too close to your church. Because Dave's church is very regional. People can travel from a long way out to come because we have a commuter culture. People have cars, they drive in. And so a lot of people from his church drive past our church to get to his church, which is kind of funny. Or they drive around it, not quite past it. So we had to try and figure out where are we actually going to reach people. So we got the maps out. We're looking at where are the main highways, where are the main rivers, where do people move, where do people go. And so, Parramatta as a city, people actually who live in Parramatta don't go to Parramatta, funnily enough. The city is annoying to get in and out of transportation-wise. So if you live in the suburbs, you actually spend your life outside of the city and you live it in the suburban shopping centres, parks and malls. And so that meant that being in the centre of the city means you're going to be reaching a totally different group of people if you're in the suburbs. And so that changed how we planted and what we did. And that makes up the social boundaries. So the people who live in the city are often young migrants who are working, hotel jobs, studying as students, don't have families, aren't married. versus the suburbs is actually far more stable, young families, those type of things. So we had to figure that out. And obviously planting a suburban church is very different to an urban church. So there's a few things. Governmental boundaries. We sort of tried to keep within in our city, we have like local councils that own particular parts of the city. And so we tried to keep within the City of Parramatta council area.
Excellent. What about meeting places in this area? How much research do you have to do with that?
Yeah, obviously you need somewhere to gather. You can gather in a home, as we know, or you can rent a facility like this. In my city, in Parramatta, it was very difficult to try and find a meeting place. We had to look. We had 40 or 50 different venues that we called and were rejected from. We got no after no after no after no after no. So we're trying to find somewhere that's not too big, not too expensive, but also not too small. And so we had a list. We had an Excel database. We wrote down every venue, how big it was, what it would require, the number, the contact person, when we contacted them, what their answer was, if we'd recontacted them, and we just started going through, boom, 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 boom. And then eventually, by God's grace, we got narrowed down to 2. And one was a bowling club. I'm not sure if you lawn bowls? Have you know the sport? So in Australia, every town has a lawn bowls club. It's a very British thing, I guess. And so there was a bowling club, but it's a place of alcohol and gambling. And so not the greatest place, but it was that, or we had a school that had offered us a spot because the church had just left. And so, it was pretty easy. We chose the school in the end. But the downside of choosing a school was we were in the middle of the back hall of a school. No one ever walked past. It was totally out of the way. So it meant that trying to reach people, we're never going to get passers-by. We're never going to get people that don't have a car. So there's the realities that where you choose to meet dictates who can come. Like being here means you can't reach people over there, or people that can't get transport or don't have the money to pay for transport.
And also, I suppose, the vibe of the place. So if you choose a school for sort of more middle-aged families with kids, they can be a bit like, it doesn't seem very established. It's not a church building.
Yeah, and now we've got a new building. It's not new, but it's an old chapel, a Brethren chapel. And it's cute and it's fun and it's right on the street and it's in the thick of it. But, for upper middle class, prosperous people, it's a bit povo and it looks, like for them, they're like, oh, it's not the nicest place to go. So it's not as attractive. But it's attractive to different type of people who want like a small little community feel. So pros and cons.
How much did you think through other churches, ministries currently operating in Parramatta? Yeah, and how did that positively and negatively affect?
Yeah, so we wanted to make sure that there wasn't probably an oversaturation of gospel preaching churches in the one area. Parramatta's big, but not, ginormous. It's not Addis Ababa. It's not 12 million people. It's 300,000. And so there are a good number of churches, but there wasn't too many. And I actually went around and met with the pastors of the good churches and just said, how do you feel about me coming in and planting? And they were good-hearted, and they said, actually, we need more good churches in the city. We need guys to come in, so we welcome you. And that was really lovely. So we plotted out where all the good churches were, and we just, tried to make sure we knew them. We spoke to them before we came. We let them know we were coming, and we built up a good friendship with them. And so we thought there was probably a good balance, that we weren't going in as just an unnecessary extra gospel presence. Okay,
excellent. When you were thinking about Paramount, what did you see about the main risks or obstacles to really successfully church planting there?
Yeah, so the risks, one of them, I wrote in my prospectus was me. I'm the biggest risk because of, I'm not your typical Parramatta person. I don't know the city. I didn't grow up there. Don't have any connections with the people there. Don't know anyone in the city. My whole life had not been spent in the West. And I'm not of a cultural ethnic group. I'm not Indian, or I wasn't Lebanese. So I didn't have that connection point either from history, from religious or ethnic. And so in some ways, as the sole planter, we were going in with very little momentum heading our way. So that was one risk. Another risk was just because it's up and coming, it was very difficult to find places to meet. That was difficult. If we lost our venue, it was going to be very difficult to find a new one. There wasn't going to be any, physical harm risk, we thought, going in, so that wasn't a factor. The other risks were, would people join? Would people come from your church? Would they join? And I have to pull up my sheet to see what else we had. But it wasn't a terribly risky plant, I would say, because we had a great team coming with us.
It's lower risk.
Lower risk, yeah.
Yeah, okay, good. Who are the people in your area whom you knew that could help you understand the area? If so, before you even got there, introduce you to others who might be planting. Did you do much research? How did you?
I would say I wish I had done more. I'd say I probably didn't do this well enough, and that if we could do our time again, probably we would have moved to Parramatta for a bit longer, because we were the only, not many people from our church plant team lived in the area, so we're all starting afresh. So it's meant that it's just taken a lot longer because we don't have the connections. So I got to know a few people. By God's grace, I joined with all the good churches, and in our state, it's legal to go into the school and teach the gospel. And so we had banded together as churches to pay for someone to go into the schools on behalf of our churches and teach voluntary kids the gospel, which is an amazing opportunity. And we had this board that we put together, the Parramatta Scripture Board. And so I met with all the good pastors in the area once a month for 12 months before I planted. So that was good. So we had those connections. But in terms of actually knowing people, families, non-Christians on the ground, we did all of that after we moved in. And it's still just... And because it's suburban rather than urban in a lot of it, suburban people in my country are very slow to give you their life, to let you in, to hang out, to share their kids with you in that sense. And so it's just taken a long time.
Okay, excellent. Then finally, the planter's wife. What are your thoughts about the area and how it would help Maddie or hinder Maddie in raising children?
Yeah, for us, it was going to be like our fourth move as a family to a new area. And so it was a little bit like, do we want to do it again? We're going to take our kids out of school. We're going to take them to neighbours that they don't know. We'd moved from Helensburgh, Wollongong down south, up to your area, over to America, to another city, and then to your city again, and then to Parramatta. So for us, it was like, her preference would have been no. And in fact, a lot of times she said, can we please not do this? And I had to keep building into her and leading her. It's like, no, we've got to do this for the cause of Christ. I took her, we spent a night in the city to get a feel for it. And the other hard thing was she was pregnant. She was just about to have a baby as we were preparing to plant. And so, again, that just adds another factor. But it is a nice area. Like, it's a good area. And so we were able to foresee what our life would look like living there. And so it wasn't terribly risky in that respect. There was good enough schools in the area, and it did make it possible.
Okay, excellent. Look, my story is really similar in headline, but just to show you some of the differences. Obviously, I was doing a totally cross-cultural plant, moving from the United Kingdom to Australia. We didn't have a team. We had 6 of us, including my wife and I, who arrived. 2 of those were a year late anyway, because they were adopting more children. So I was starting from scratch. Originally, our church plant was meant to be in a place called Newcastle, which is about 2 hours north. The reason for that is because the man that was meant to be doing it, Mike Paslich, as I mentioned yesterday, would have been a brand new pastor, and he was looking for an area that was probably a little bit smaller and wouldn't feel so overwhelmed in a big city. But as soon as I took it on, I knew I wanted us to be in Sydney, because I really believed the Lord was calling us to be an Antioch church, a church-sending church. And the reality is, where we live in Sydney, we were just going to attract more people, and they were probably going to be wealthier, which I wasn't bothered about serving the wealthy, but I knew if we can bring people together, that's how we can able to fund church plants and keep sending people out. And as the first one in the country, it was really important to be, where are we going to be?
Similar to this.
Yeah, really similar to planting here. It's like, okay, we can build a significant church where we can actually do things from. And so that was really us. Even the area that we chose, in part, it was because where the people that were initially contacting us were from. So we're like, oh, well, we'll go here and move that. And so there's different ways of doing it, but we have to think it through. So what we're going to do is I want all you guys to be in pairs. Obviously, you're in twos. Issachar can join yourself. And then I want you to literally pick a place. So pick either somewhere you think, oh, I might actually try and plant there, or a made-up place if you want to. But I'd probably choose one that, between you, choose one that you think, I could imagine this, and start working through the questions. Now, obviously, some questions you might get to and think, I don't really know the answer to that. Fine. Instead, write down how would you find the answer for that. So if you don't know the demographic of the area, it's fine. How would you find out about that? What would you do? Because you are going to need to try and find out. So locations. What did you pick? If we look at what specific location and the first two questions, what specific and why did you choose that location? Let's start with your group. So the heart of your group would be, for the purpose of this, trying to hit that younger generation. So you're being influenced by where you're going to pick, obviously. Love that. So carrying on with your group a little bit. We've heard about some of the different sociological and economical things already. You've already done a good job of that. For all of your different places, or particularly for you guys, let me start with this. What type of meeting places would be available? So if you were going to build a church that was going to really attract these young people, what would you need for that? I like that you're thinking about it. For you guys, as you think about your area, what would be the sociological, economical, ethnical, what would it look like in that type of area that you're thinking about? That's excellent. Look, all you guys are thinking through it really, really well. It's really encouraging. And you're right, your location dictates so many different things, and all the different things you've said so far, you're like, that's excellent. So what we're going to do is we're going to go on to section 2 now, which Riley's just put in front of you.
Okay, here are the questions. So types of things you want to be thinking through. You've probably done a lot of this already in your missions, contextualization stuff with city to city. But number 1, who are the various people groups in the area you are trying to reach? You've already started talking about that. It goes with the location. Among those people groups, are there any that you believe would be your primary target group? Number 3, describe the typical person in this community that you'd like to draw, as in you'd like to pull in. What is an unchurched person in the area where you want to plant? Number 4, what specific needs, spiritual and otherwise, do the people in this area have that would be able to be met by a church plant? Number 5, based on personal conversations with people in the community where you want to plant, how would a new church plant be perceived? Number 6, what are the main mission opportunities that you would recommend this area for a Sovereign Grace church plant? And number 7, what size of church do you think is sustainable and likely in this area?
That's really good. Yeah, so look, questions 4 and 5 in particular, you're not just thinking about people, you start to think through contextualization, which is what you're talking about before, in terms of, okay, well, so these young people, who are they? What do they believe? What do they even do Monday through Sunday? Because that's going to influence like when you might want to meet or what type of things you might want to do. Because there's no point in doing a Sunday morning if then. So, for example, I'll give you an illustration. In Sydney, if we were to plant a church on the beaches, a Sunday morning would be a disaster because everybody who has children all does something called Little Nippers, which is all swimming in the sea. It's on a Sunday morning. They will never come because it's a god to them. That's the cultural narrative. Like everybody does that. So there's no point in just going, well, we always meet on a Sunday morning. You can, but they're never going to come. So you've got to know the culture you're reaching. Otherwise, you can't interact with it. So let's look at what you did for Paro. Who are the various people groups in your area? Many and varied.
Yeah, I think this was tough because it was such a diverse area, and not knowing the area super well before going there, I have found this a challenge. This has probably been a perennial challenge for our church plan, is actually trying to figure out who are we trying to?
Probably a good case study of having not maybe done enough on
Yeah,
this.
I would say this would be one area which I think it'd be well worth giving a lot of time and attention to, because without doing it, you kind of, if you don't have a good plan, then you sort of throw darts against the wall and then you draw the target around it and you're like, hey, look, we did it. Rather than being like, this is what we're aiming for. We're going to change what we do to reach these type of people. And we probably didn't do that. We probably came in pretty generalized and just, in a sense, started the church and then hope, well, what will the Lord do? Who will he bring along as we preach the gospel? And so we knew who we weren't going to try and reach. We actually weren't going to try and reach into the Indian community because of the barriers culturally, language-wise, and it was just a bit not who we were. One of the people groups I did try and reach was probably people in a similar life stage to me, young families. And so one of the things that we did was, as a family and another family, we got to move into the same area. We went to the same school. We know the same parents. We invite the same parents over to our house. Our kids are in the same sporting programs. And then I've joined this, my kids have been in the same teams the past 3 or 4 years with the same parents. So bit by bit, I knew it was going to take a long time. So this wasn't like a quick strategy, but just trying to win people over week by week by week by going along. So one of the targets we've had has been young families, because that's who we are. It's our most natural target. I wasn't in a stage sort of to reach the young people, because I got 4 kids and it's just I don't have the time. I can't kind of swing my life to make it like that. So we've been reaching out to young families, and then we did quite a lot of just walking around trying to meet people, and we had people come along as a result of that. So we went more of a general approach, but it wasn't targeted.
You were maybe finding out more once you got there.
Yeah.
You knew you were going to Parramatta, and then
I think
okay, now we're getting a feel of it.
Yeah.
Rather than being...
And we were we never felt this great burden for a particular person to reach. But now that we've got this building, we're in a street where there's houses all around us. There's the type of people that walk past. And now we're really starting to think, how are we going to get them? How are we going to reach them? How are we going to make it accessible? There's low socioeconomic people around us, people that are in wheelchairs, but our church has stairs. So we're like, we've got to build a ramp so these people can actually come in. I'm reaching out to a local nursing home. So I'm reaching out to the elderly. And if any of them want to come, it's going to be very difficult based on our building. So things like that.
It's a good illustration there, Ronnie, of just joining the dots between that location piece and the type of building you choose does tend to dictate who might walk through the doors.
Yeah. It's very hard for someone who's elderly or disabled to come to our church, because you got to climb stairs, and then you got to go down a ramp in to find a bathroom. There are just physical limitations that
Socioeconomic issues.
Yep.
That in reality, sadly, there would be some people that would be like, I probably wouldn't go to that area.
Yeah.
Or you pigeonhole where the church is going to be.
Yeah. And because my city is quite broad, you could go in multiple directions, and our church plant team wasn't made up of any particular strength in one area. So there was no obvious, let's go after the youth because we got this young, vibrant team. It wasn't even young families, and people didn't even all live in Parramatta. So,
describe the typical person in this community that you would like to draw. Yeah. So obviously you weren't as prepared as maybe you could have been in hindsight, but even as you look at it now, who are you thinking, I think these are the people we seem to be effective with?
Yeah, one typical person is the young family. Their children in school, they're a suburban lifestyle. They're thinking about education, they're thinking about opportunities for their children. So then as a result, their life is built around their kids. And so if you're invested in their kids, in their kids' world, you've got a greater chance of meeting them. So that would be one primary target group we're looking at. And the other one probably now would be having more of a heart towards the younger adult. But we're just in the embryonic stages. So there's a big university in our city, but it's a really random one. It's split across 3 different campuses. A lot of people just do it online. They're not actually there in person. So it's a bit of a hard one to reach out to. A lot of the high school kids don't live in the area; they travel into the area. So I probably thought it was going to be easier than it was, and then we got on the ground and realized, oh, this is a lot more complex than I probably first imagined. So young families would be one. I mean, that would be our main one, I would say.
Yeah, very good. What specific needs, spiritual or otherwise, do the people in your area have that would be able to be met by a church plant?
Yes. So there's lots of people who are lost in Hinduism and lost in Islam and lost in Buddhism and even other various religions, Zoroastrianism for the Persians, etc. So there's a lot of religiosity, and it's about trying to help bring the gospel into there. So there's lots of need. And then the other need, Catholics, lots of people who grew up religious but have no concern for it now. So a lot of the guys I try and reach out to are like, yeah, I went to Catholic school, but I don't care anymore, basically. And so we have the life, the community, the hope, the joy, the peace of the gospel. And a lot of it is just trying to help people see that this is actually something that they want, because they're not crying out for it. So we sort of have to show them that they actually have a need, and we're trying to help them get a taste for it. And the other one would just be the secular person who's looking for prosperity in this world, but obviously you can never find it safely and securely, and so we're trying to help people see, you can find it in Christ.
I think this is an interesting, based on personal conversations with people in the community where you want to plant, how would a new plant even be perceived?
So we talking to churches, they were like, yeah, you could plant here, that'd be fine. But I think in general, no one in Parramatta was excited. People were not like, oh, a new church? That's so interesting. I've been looking for a church. It's been very dormant. There's been not much need. And so I think the primary perception of planting a new church in Parramatta is like, meh. People are like, okay, good for you. I'm never going to come. Since getting this new building, though, we have found that there have been people, Christians, that haven't been going to church that are seeing, because we meet outside for coffee and everything before and after the service, and they're seeing this vibrant community. And so people are coming going, I haven't been going to church for so long. And so people in our new little community are going, I think I like this. I'm interested to find out. But on the whole, apathy, which has been, apathy is the worst, because I'd rather hostility than apathy, because at least people care. But when people are apathetic, you're like, yeah, take it or leave it. I'll probably leave it. You're like, oh, man.
It is one of the challenges of like the area that you're talking about, which I really like the sound of. But it's like the challenge that we face in Sydney is because it's quite wealthy. People are just totally apathetic to the gospel. It's just like, I'm really pleased for you. No interest at all. Yeah, it's actually really hard. It can be challenging. So what would be the main mission opportunities that you see would recommend this area for a plant at all?
Yeah, so we saw the population growth, the migrant factor that people are dislodged. And so we have had some people come in on that respect, and that's been really good. Some of the earliest people that joined our church became Christians, migrated from the Philippines, knew someone in the church, they came in as Roman Catholic, and then one of them was converted. Sadly, her husband wasn't, and he joined the church and then has recently left, deciding he doesn't want to be a Protestant anymore. So the migrant population was definitely one mission opportunity that we're still trying to reach out into. And then the other one was the young families, just trying to reach that suburban group of people that are just in and around. The other one was the young adults, but we haven't got, I thought we would do it, but we haven't got there.
Yeah, the interesting thing, as soon as you decide on your target group, you need to think very carefully about building the right team then for that group. So if you want to, for example, in our context, you want to go to Parramatta and reach out to Indians, but then no Indians are on your team, it's going to be a problem. Really making sure you're joining those things together. Another factor in there, in our context, but it might be in your context as well, is not that you set a church up knowing other Christians will come to it. But there is a factor that in our context, there really isn't any Reformed charismatic churches, like at all. So there's a lot of Christians that will oscillate between Hillsong, where they have really lovely singing, but often the preaching is terrible, or an Anglican church where they'll often get really good preaching, but the singing is really, really boring, and they don't believe in the gifts. And so people are being forced to choose, and they sort of oscillate between the two. And then Sovereign Grace comes along, and for many people, they're like, I found a home for the first time in my life that I fit. And so you don't set up churches hoping or thinking, oh, I hope lots of Christians come. But you at least need to be aware that when you're building a team, it definitely is beneficial in certain circumstances, depending on what you're trying to build. So particularly if you end up we're trying to actually build a big church. Okay, well, you can do that totally in a totally evangelistic area. But if you really believe you're called to that, you at least want to pay attention to if there are already some other really big, significant churches there that are preaching exactly what you're preaching, doing a great job, are you really needed? They seem to be doing a great job. But if you go there and you're like, it's a big area and there really isn't other churches like us, then that's certainly a factor. And bear that in mind. What size of church do you think is sustainable and likely as you think about Parramatta? Because it does dictate it, right?
To go back, I'll answer that in a moment, but one of the things that probably drove how we planted was more like, let us establish a gospel presence, and we'll figure it out more so as we get established. And so rather than spending the time on the front end, we sought to establish a healthy, gospel-centered, disciple-making church that is then poised to do more of this mission, which we certainly have done and we've seen fruit from. So, maybe we could have done it better, but I think our plan was get a good thing going, and then we'll have strength to actually do this more effectively as we're established. In terms of the size of a church, I think that probably in our area, because of buildings and locations, something about 150 adults to 200 is probably sustainable, and then you'd plant again. It's very expensive and getting more expensive, and the government regulations make it very difficult for a church. So I don't know if it's the same here, but for where we are, we need lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of parking if we're going to have a public meeting. Even if people don't have cars, you have to pay for the parking spaces, and to build a parking lot costs millions of dollars, and so to have a big building means a big parking lot, which means a lot and a lot and a lot of money, and so that does make it a lot more difficult. So you're looking at renting a facility, not owning. You're looking at finding a space, but then you're always at the whim of where they want you, and if they want you. So I think about 150 adults would be your sort of upper limit, and then I'd probably look to plant again.
Okay, yeah, so that's a really good illustration. So he's picking an area that the church would probably get as big as this room is, and then probably won't get over it, so you're going to try and plant. For somebody else, they might say, I really think we're going to try and build a church of about 800. I think that's how we can make the biggest impact and really affect young people and young adults and draw them in and help us to plant. For somebody else, they might say, in your circumstance, they might be like, actually, if we can grow a church to 40 people, we want to multiply and multiply and multiply, because we don't necessarily want to build a mega church. We're just trying to influence as many people as possible. They're different models. And so you've got to know kind of what you're shooting for before you start, because it totally changes which bit you're doing. The bigger church might put a lot of emphasis on, we really need to try and get a building. A smaller church might not be worried about that at all. We're happy to go on the hop. We're happy to go inside people's houses and do that because we've got to keep moving. Probably got to put more emphasis on training pastors, because it's like you're going to be turning them over quite a bit if you're going to keep rapid expansion. So you do have to think about what type of church are you trying to build in the different areas. So why don't we get to work on this?
One other thing I'd say before you get started is that
this is going to be inspirational, guys.
Yeah, this is going to be good.
No,
but once you start your church, it's very difficult to do the mission and reach people, because you start preaching and then you got to write a sermon, and you start groups and you got to prepare groups and train leaders, and you start a kids ministry, you got to resource it, and you got to train your leaders, and then you got to do the finances and the admin and the account, and you all these things, and suddenly your time to actually give attention to doing this well If you're not careful, it's really difficult. So just keep that in mind as you plan. Is just once you start the thing, and you've got people who need care and counsel, and they have crises, and you're trying to lead a team. Oh man, this gets pushed out to the margin. Even though that's what drove you in the first place, it gets pushed and marginalized. So you gotta, if you do the work now and have clarity, then it'll help you once it all gets thrown up in the air in the throes of a church plant.
Yeah,
I
excellent.
hope that was inspirational.
Yes, you got a question?
And that probably has fed into how I've planted, in a sense of like, I didn't want just one ethnic group kind of church. I wanted a multi-ethnic, multi-generational church. However, I think the Lord will bring people, whatever you do, and people will meet people. And if you have a diverse team, I think there is a power in specialization and focus, and at least putting energy for particular people in certain types of people. And so I think it is helpful to have a target, even if it's not the one target for the whole church. It might be, if you have 50 people in your church, you guys are targeting these people, and you guys are targeting these people, and you guys are targeting these people, because you can't say everything to everyone. You can't speak in the same language to everyone. You can't posture everything in the same way. And so you do have to specialize, otherwise you reach no one. And so there is a tension there that ought to be maintained, but maybe,
I think there's a difference as well between targeting a group and rejecting other groups. I think they're two different things. So say, for example, I think you did have a target group, but in some ways your target group is, I want to reach people in Parramatta. You didn't want people travelling in. You knew that. Yeah. So the point of his group, it was like, I want people to live in Parramatta. I don't want people travelling in. I don't want to do a regional thing. I really want to get people that live here. So really then it's in some ways easy, because you just look at whoever's there, that's going to be your people. And I was very similar. My target group was just actually trying to reach North Sydney. And the challenge is you're talking about 100 different nationalities, so we didn't target any specific nationality. But if I'm trying to plant a Chinese-speaking church in the United States, I'm clearly targeting a group, Chinese-speaking. But those brothers feel a real burden for that. They're already displaced. They're in the United States. They feel a burden that if we can reach other Chinese speakers, I think if they come to know the Lord, they'll be more likely to go home to China and make a difference back home. So they've specifically made a target group of, we're going for Chinese speakers. Language barrier obviously gives you a target group immediately. So I don't know all your different languages here in Africa, but if you're desirous to go and do an English-speaking church in Ivory Coast, well, that's fine. But all the French speakers aren't going to be understanding you, so automatically they're kind of excluded, because you've targeted, but it's going to be very difficult to target both. You can speak French, you can speak English. What are you going to do? So I think there's a difference between, hey, this is before the Lord, how I think we're really going to try and go after in a purposeful way to make a start. There's a difference in that to we're really going to reach Ethiopians, and then if white folk come in, can you leave because we're Ethiopians? We're not doing that. But we are saying we're trying to build a church here in Addis that's primarily Ethiopian. But if you're not Ethiopian, you're very welcome. You wouldn't vocalize that to anybody, but that's what you're thinking as a pastor in your mind. So you're not trying to build, and I think Michael had to make that choice. Is he trying to build an international church or a truly Ethiopian church? Because they're kind of two different things. If you're going to build an international church, we'll probably import all the pastors from overseas. If you're going to build a truly Ethiopian church, you don't want to be importing people from overseas. You want to be raising locals. You have to make that decision. That's a target group moment. But yeah, without labouring, you're not excluding people that aren't that. So if internationals came into this church, we're like, well, that's great, welcome. But it's not primarily what Michael's thinking about. He's thinking, I want to reach Africans. I want to reach Ethiopians for the Lord. And so you have to, I think sometimes, particularly if you're the lead pastor or the planter, in some ways you probably have to have the courage of your convictions in terms of, Lord, who do you want me to reach? Is it just whoever's in this area? Is it that, no, I think God's brought me to Ethiopia to reach Somalians in this city, and I'm going to do that unashamedly. That's what I'm meant to be doing. Or am I meant to be moving to Ethiopia to actually plant an international church? That I'm just going to find people from all over the world and try and plant out. All the above are all right. But you just got to have your own courage and convictions. What is God calling you to do? And then do that. Because one day you stand before the Lord and you think, this is what I felt you calling me to do. And
Well, I would love in my church to raise up a church plant that reaches the Indian, migrants. And it could be down the road. It could be in the same building, because I just know how they work. It's going to be very difficult to do it as our church, but I would give so much money to see that to happen.
A classic illustration of it would be, for example, Australians, on the whole, wouldn't think culturally, or after church we'll have a meal together and then we'll spend all afternoon together. Indians definitely would, and would be offended if you didn't. Well, that's two really different people groups. So which one are we trying to, because it dictates, are we having a meal afterwards or are we not? And so you kind of have to work out, because if you make a decision, we're not, there's nothing wrong with that, you are going to make it hard for Indians to probably engage with that. But you might decide because of that, and because we're going to actually have a separate service in a different location, led by an Indian, and we're going to fund that and help that. Let's win the world, there's different ways of doing it, but you just go.
There's other factors too, like if your main mission strategy is interpersonal relationships rather than the church doing the mission for the church, then, so for us, that's one of our strategies is you reach your neighbors, you reach your friends, you reach your colleagues. But in a city like ours, the colleagues of the people that work with my members of my church live all around Sydney. They don't live in Parramatta, hardly any. So, there's this problem of like you're trying to reach, but they could be reaching a Malaysian who lives in Dave's area or lives 2 hours down south who travels in. And so those kind of factors make it really different as well, is if you're getting your members to reach to their colleagues and friends, but they draw in from a wide space, then it changes the makeup of it.
Which again is knowing the area. So in a place like Sydney, or if we're in London or any of those big places, people are going to commute, and they're probably going to be sitting in their car for an hour, twice, on the way there and on the way back. And then their friends might be doing the same, so they might live 2 hours away. Whereas where I was in the UK, if you were commuting more than 5 minutes in a car, that was far too long for people. So everybody was right there. Everybody you were reaching was right there. That really changes the dynamic of what even you're able to do missionally. Because if you want to pull people into a building to run an alpha, for example, it's no problem. They can come right there. Now in Sydney, we're having to be a bit more creative because it's like your friends live 2 hours away. So we've started to do a lot more online Zoom alpha courses because then it doesn't matter where you live. You're able to do it, and it's just being able to be where you go. Yes, it does, yeah. For me, I would start with, okay, I've got a real heart for young professional people. And I would try and find a place where there's a high saturation of those people. But it might be that as you look at that, you realize, gosh, we need 20 churches like this in Addis. Oh, well, there you go. That's the plan. We're going to try and get 20 churches like this. But so your target group, you want a higher percentage of the group. So where I am actually is like that. So I knew, but here's how the thought process goes. When I felt called by the Lord to go to Sydney, I really sensed we were going to be an Antioch church, that we were meant to be a church planting church. Well, it doesn't take long to realize, well, that's going to mean a building, that's going to mean funds, that's going to be the type of people that we would be willing to move and travel. They're young adults. They're often young professionals. And the area that we ended up in Sydney is one of the most young professional areas in Sydney. It comes with its own challenges, so you end up with different challenges to what, say, these guys would get. But we ended up with an area that would be symptomatic of that. If I had actually said, I want to build an Antioch church, and actually gone to Parramatta, it might have been a bit harder. Because they are young professionals, but they're dropping down. They're not the lawyers and the doctors and all that. They're I wouldn't say working class, but more blue collar.
Teachers, nurses.
Yeah. Apprentices, traders. So we deliberately picked an area in Sydney that we knew. There are lots more areas in Sydney that I could have picked, but it was what we're like. It made sense.
And you sort of just have to pick somewhere in the end.
You got to pick somewhere. You try your best, and in many ways, I wouldn't even overthink it. So when I didn't even know Sydney very well, so I was just like, well, where are we going to plant? And Mike Look, I think this area is really great. You know, this is an area where people often don't know the Lord. They have some Christianity sometimes because of sort of Anglican upbringings. They're reasonably wealthy. There's different places where you could locate. There's loads of people, like hundreds of thousands of people. All right, we'll go there. That was about as long as it took. It wasn't like overly thought. Because people are people. You know, the lost are there. And you're like, I'm just going to get in there and preach my heart out. And so I wouldn't overthink it. But if you feel drawn to that, like the area you're thinking of is probably like, yeah, try and get there. Let's go here. And then you're like, all right, let's go for it. Yeah, excellent question.
Yeah, we were doing more of that before the COVID lockdowns, and that sort of
didn't help us.
Sort of put us on a bit of a back foot on that one. So recently we've done a few.
Just to be culturally irrelevant, COVID for us, it was, I don't know exactly what it was like. We were literally asked to stay in our homes for nearly a year. We weren't allowed out.
Twice.
So it wasn't that we didn't fancy it. The government was saying, you're allowed out once a day to go to the shops. That was it. So it's very difficult. Just to be culturally aware.
Yeah, you were in my area. You were allowed out of your home for an hour. That was it.
Yeah.
It was.
So that stopped outreach.
So and then put us a bit on the back foot with those type of things, and then people became a bit more cautious about. They don't want people to just walk up to them and start talking to them because they're afraid of disease. So we've actually gone backwards in some of that. But we were doing more walk up, going out and trying to, invite people to things. We've done a few community events, but things just, I think things are slow. We're slowly warming our way back up into those events. There's a guy that's just joined our church who's an expert at that. He's a big Iranian dude and Persian, and he loves it, and he's got such a faith for it. And I have a good sense that I'm going to be equipping him to release the saints and start getting more of that type of stuff happening. Because you can do that in our city because people are more religiously.
You had Shanu for some time?
Yeah, and then the other guy that did do that was leading it, then left the church. So that was not encouraging. We've had quite a few interns join our church and then leave. We've had 3 now. And so every time that happens, you invest money, time, effort, and then you have to start again. And so it does just... You have all these grand hopes and you wish, but then it doesn't happen. But probably 2 or 3 times a year, we're trying to do something as a church.
And we're the same. I mean, my sort of... I've come from the UK. And in the UK, it's not build it and they'll come. It's not going to happen. Build it and they don't care less. In our culture. I mean, I went to a school of 600 students. There was 2 Christians. That's the culture. So no one cares. So if you're not evangelistic, meaning you are going to befriend people in the world, be a friend of sinners, get to know them, tell them about Jesus, nothing is changing. And so when I moved to Australia, I came with the same philosophy, because it's not a million miles away from the UK, sadly. It's more Christian than the UK, but it's problematic. So we have to do a lot. We have to do a lot under the banner of all things to all men, so that by all means we may win some. And so we do all sorts of things. We have a ministry called SG Care, which we do all sorts of things. We try and care for the homeless. We try and care for those that are really in poverty and they're going to really struggle. So we have a lady that works 1 day a week just doing that and seeks to mobilize the church to do that. We used to do kids club type things for little children. We ran that for some time. We do like mothers and toddlers classes. So you're just spending time with the mums, get together with other mums in the area. We try and do quite a few things a year as a church. So we have something called International Sunday, where we invite the whole church to come. We're a very international church, and people will come. There's something in Australia called Are You OK Day, which is about mental health, and it's like a national thing. So we always do Are You OK Sunday that week. And I know there's going to be a big, like stall in Hornsby Centre, near where we live. That is giving out cupcakes and inviting people to church that Sunday for our Are You OK Sunday. So we have to be very, very active if we're going to get people to try and get involved, as well as alphas and Christianity Explored and anything. Basically anything we can do to be missional, we try and do. We're all in. And so the church is geared that way. We have the whole premise of everyone's on mission all the time and who's your one. We even spent in our care groups that we did, we even spent 3 months this year just going through videos on evangelism and mission, how to share the gospel, praying for the lost. And we're holding each other accountable about who you're trying to reach out to, and it's such in the DNA. So the DNA of our church is that we're passionate about building a community of believers who are passionate about knowing, applying, and proclaiming the gospel. That's what we hit on all the time. We want to know the gospel, we want to apply it in our lives so that we can be a city on a hill, and we want to proclaim it. And so we've deliberately gone after that. And the target group, in some senses, is we're so multicultural as a church. Everybody just reaches out to whoever they can, and we grow internationally.
And with all that activity, there's not that much fruit. You just have to keep being. It is. You're like explaining the gospel. It's amazing. You could do the best things ever, and people are. Oh.
They'll even say, "You're really nice," and we're done.
So, and then that can hurt momentum because you're pouring in time and effort and energy and program, and you're doing so much, and you're pouring your lives out for very little fruit, which might be different for what you experience. And
yeah, it's our culture.